9 things. That's all I needed to eliminate to lose 18 pounds and change how my body reacted to food and rest after 50. No diet, no gym. Here's what those 9 things were, why each one matters more than it seems to, and what the research actually says about why they work. Your body after menopause is not the same machine it was at 30. Estrogen isn't just a reproductive hormone. It also helps your cells respond to insulin efficiently. When estrogen drops, insulin sensitivity drops with it. Glucose lingers in your bloodstream longer than it used to. Over time, that shift can nudge you toward insulin resistance, even if your eating habits haven't changed at all. That's not a character flaw. That's chemistry, playing out quietly in the background of an ordinary Tuesday. So the first thing you can stop doing is trusting the old rules. The calorie math that worked in your 30s doesn't map cleanly onto your 50s. Your hormonal environment has changed, even though the inputs on your plate look identical to what they always were. Fewer calories in, more calories burned. That equation used to be enough. Now it's incomplete, because it ignores how differently your body is metabolizing what it receives. Insulin resistance and weight gain tend to feed each other in a loop, each one making the other slightly worse over time, which is part of why a strategy that worked for 20 years can suddenly stop working, seemingly overnight. Once that idea clicks, everything else on this list becomes easier to understand, because you stop measuring yourself against the body you don't currently have, and start responding to the one that's actually here. The second thing worth stopping is relying on cardio alone to fix your metabolism. This one tends to surprise people the most. A well-known 12-month randomized trial reviewed by the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center's Ethics Board in Seattle followed 439 postmenopausal women, splitting them into 4 groups: exercise only, diet plus exercise, and a control group with no intervention. The diet-only group improved insulin resistance by roughly 24%. The diet plus exercise group improved by 26%. The exercise-only group barely moved the needle at all, an improvement so small it wasn't considered statistically meaningful. Movement still matters, deeply, for your heart, your bones, your joints, your mood. But if insulin resistance is the specific target, food appears to be doing most of the heavy lifting. Cardio by itself was never going to be enough, and for a long time, nobody told you that clearly. Think about how many hours you may have spent on a treadmill, waiting for a metabolic shift. The diet alone was far more likely to deliver. That's not wasted time. Cardiovascular health matters on its own terms. But as a lever for insulin resistance specifically, it turns out to be a much smaller lever than most people assume. The third thing to release is the fear of eating enough protein. Research tracking muscle mass across the menopause transition shows lean tissue declining faster during this stage of life, with reductions of several percentage points compared to premenopausal women of similar age. Some studies point to a process called anabolic resistance as part of the explanation, where muscles become somewhat less efficient at using protein to rebuild themselves, even when intake stays the same. It's worth being honest that the human research on this specific mechanism is still developing, not fully settled. But the muscle loss itself, whatever combination of causes drives it, is well documented, and it doesn't announce itself in any single week. It accumulates quietly. The old advice of just eat a normal moderate amount of protein quietly stopped being enough for your physiology. Many women find they benefit from meaningfully more, spread evenly across meals, rather than saved for one large dinner at the end of the day. Picture 2 identical plates of the same total protein for the day, one eaten almost entirely at dinner, the other spread across breakfast, lunch, and dinner in roughly even portions. Muscle tissue can only use so much protein at once for repair and growth. The rest gets used differently. Spacing it out gives your body more repeated opportunities to actually put that protein to work, which matters even more once anabolic resistance is part of the picture. Fourth, stop skipping meals to save calories. It sounds efficient on paper. It rarely is here. When your body is already dealing with a slower insulin response and possibly reduced muscle building efficiency, long gaps without food can push you toward losing muscle instead of losing fat. The scale might drop, but you end up lighter and weaker at the same time, which is close to the opposite of what you actually wanted when you started. Fifth, stop ignoring the difference between visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Not all body fat behaves the same way inside you. Visceral fat, the kind that gathers deep around your organs rather than just under your skin, becomes more metabolically active once estrogen declines. It's more closely tied to insulin resistance and low-grade inflammation than the fat sitting just beneath the surface. Two women can weigh exactly the same number on the scale and carry very different levels of metabolic risk, depending on where that weight is actually stored. This is part of why the scale alone quietly stopped being a reliable measure of progress for you, even though nobody explained why at the time. Waist circumference, how your clothes fit around your midsection, and how your energy feels through the day often tell you more about visceral fat than a single number on a bathroom scale ever could. It's a shift from asking how much the scale reads to asking where that weight is sitting and what it's doing while it's there. Sixth, stop treating sleep as optional or negotiable. Cortisol and insulin are close collaborators inside your body. Poor sleep raises cortisol. Elevated cortisol, over time, makes insulin resistance worse. It's a slow, quiet loop running in the background night after night, long before it ever shows up as a number on a lab test or a change on the scale. Protecting sleep isn't indulgent, it's metabolic maintenance. Menopause itself can disrupt sleep directly, through night sweats, temperature swings, and shifting hormone levels, which means the loop can start from either direction. Poor sleep worsens insulin resistance, and hormonal changes can worsen sleep. Addressing one side of that loop tends to ease pressure on the other. Seventh, stop deprioritizing strength training in favor of endurance work alone. Given that muscle building efficiency may decline during this stage of life, and given how strongly muscle mass predicts long-term metabolic health, resistance work becomes less of an optional extra and more of a foundation. Every session sends your body a signal. This tissue is still needed, still useful, worth maintaining. Skip that signal long enough, and your body tends to believe you, gradually deprioritizing muscle in favor of other tissue. This doesn't require hours in a gym. 2 or 3 focused sessions a week, targeting the major muscle groups, appears to be enough to keep that signal active and consistent. 8. Stop ignoring a hormone called adiponectin, even if you've never heard the word before this exact moment. Adiponectin is released by fat cells themselves, and it helps regulate how efficiently your body uses energy and stays sensitive to insulin. Research tracking hundreds of women through the menopause transition found that adiponectin levels drop to their lowest point during perimenopause, before beginning to climb back up afterward. Low adiponectin is associated with metabolic syndrome and weight gain. Here's the encouraging part though. Weight loss itself tends to raise adiponectin levels back up, which means once the cycle starts moving in your favor, it can build on itself instead of working against you. This is one of the clearest examples of how the body isn't working against you on purpose during this stage of life. It's navigating a temporary hormonal low point, one that tends to ease as new equilibrium sets in after the transition. 9th, and maybe the hardest one to actually release. Stop blaming willpower. Insulin resistance driven by declining estrogen, muscle loss that outpaces old expectations, falling adiponectin, disrupted sleep architecture. None of that is a discipline problem. It's a hormonal one, running quietly underneath every decision you make about food and movement. You can align every single one of these 9 things and still have days that feel harder than they should. That's not failure showing up. That's biology, adjusting in real time, the way it always has. So what does removing these 9 things actually look like, day to day, in a kitchen and a calendar, instead of in a research paper? It starts with reframing food as a metabolic tool, not just a running calorie count. Protein distributed across each meal, not concentrated only at dinner. Movement that includes resistance work alongside walking or cardio, not instead of it. Sleep treated with the same seriousness as diet, because cortisol doesn't take days off just because your schedule is busy. Fewer skipped meals, more consistency. Less obsession with the scale as the only signal that something is working. A short walk after meals, which can gently support blood sugar regulation without needing to be intense. A consistent bedtime and wake time, even on weekends, because your circadian rhythm doesn't distinguish between a Tuesday and a Saturday, the way your calendar does. None of these individually feels dramatic. Together, they add up to a fundamentally different metabolic environment than the one you were operating in before. None of this promises a specific number by a specific date, and it shouldn't. Bodies respond at different speeds, and postmenopausal metabolism has more moving variables than any single video could ever fully account for. What the research does support is this. Women who combine dietary changes with resistance training and adequate protein intake tend to see meaningfully better markers of insulin sensitivity than those relying on exercise alone or on willpower alone. That's not a guarantee, and it was never meant to be one. It's a direction, backed by data instead of guesswork, which is a very different thing than a promise. If there's one thing to take from all 9 of these, let it be this. Your body after 50 isn't broken. It's operating under a different hormonal rule set than it used to. And once you actually understand the new rules, you stop fighting yourself and start working with what's genuinely happening inside you. That shift in understanding, more than any single food swap or workout, tends to be what changes everything else that follows. What would it look like if you pick just one of these 9 to change, starting this week? Not all 9 at once. Just one. Small, hormone-aware adjustments, repeated consistently over time, are how most lasting change during this stage of life actually happens. Start there and let the rest follow at its own pace.